Hi everyone, this is Denise Saladay. Welcome to the Clarity 16.1.1 Supportability and Feature Training. In this session, I'm going to cover enhancements to action items. We'll briefly discuss what's new. So in the modern UX, we created a new action items library. And in that library, administrators will be able to create and update and delete action items. And these action items, they're not going to be triggered by process. They'll be triggered by business roles inside of blueprints. Inside of my workspace, we've added a new action items tab where assignees can actually view any action items that are assigned to them, and they'll be able to take action on them as well. Last release, we introduced the action items module for investments. In this release, we're just circling back and delivering that for custom master objects, so that users will be able to actually see action item history for custom master objects and any audit trail data, which will allow them to see the full life cycle of these action items. And next, we've added some enhancements to the responding to action items via email capability that we delivered last release. And lastly, we added a new Purge action items job that will allow users to delete action items based on specific parameters. And we also made a modification to the existing delete process instance job where it will no longer delete action items. So why is this important? Customers have been asking for a way to create simple action items inside Modern without creating them in Classic under Processes. They've also expressed that it's challenging to make any changes to these action items once processes have started. So we wanted to provide some better capability to allow them to do that in these new action items. Additionally, we wanted to provide a way for assignees to view their history and actually take action on their action items that are assigned to them under My Workspace while they're working on some of their other items. From a custom master object perspective, there's really no way today in the product where you can view all action items for a specific custom master object. So we wanted to provide this capability of having the action items module for custom master objects, similar to what we did for investments last release. We wanted to make some enhancements to the responding to action items via email capability as well. And lastly, we really wanted customers to have control over when their action items are deleted. In the past, whenever they had action items associated to processes, and they deleted process instances, those action items would be deleted along with that. So we actually are preserving these action items, and we're no longer deleting them inside that job. And now we're introducing a new job where we're allowing customers to purge action items directly based on certain criteria. To create new action items in this library, you need to navigate into Administration, and you'll see a new tile called Action Items. Now, in order to see this tile, you need to have a new global security right called Administration Action Items Navigate. Users will be able to create new action items for investments, custom master objects, but currently we do not have sub-object support. As I mentioned before, action items in this library are not triggered via processes, and they're not even dependent on them. They're going to be triggered by business roles inside of blueprints. And these business roles will be triggered when users are updating data, not on creation or copy. Users will also be able to view action items from this new library in Classic under Organizer. Once you click on the Action Items tile, you'll see the top screen, the new Action Items grid. The first thing that you may notice is that the Quick Create Plus is not available in this grid. So in order to create new action items, you need to click the New Action Item button. Once you do that, you'll get a new modal, Create New Action Item, which is step 1 of 3. All required fields in this modal are designated with an asterisk, and unless they're populated, the next button will not be enabled. So after you enter the name and description, the next thing that you'll enter is the target object. Now the target object can continue to be updated throughout the process of creating this action item. But once you save the action item, you'll no longer be able to update the target object. Notice that the subject and message attributes have a button called Add Attribute. Similar to how Classic works today, once you click on that, you'll be able to select variables to show inside your subject or message. So in the example here that we're looking at for the project object, we're going to see a list of attributes on the project object whenever you click on Add Attribute, and you can select the variables that belong to the project. In this case, you'll see under Subject that I've selected a variable for the project name. You will be able to select the same attribute more than once if you want to. And obviously, if you change the target object, you'll need to clear out the variables because you'll need to pick variables from the new target object. Now, after you click Next on the Step 1 screen, you'll receive this screen for Step 2. This is where you'll actually add the recipients and the actions for this action item. There are 3 general types of recipients that you could add, and they're all multi-selects. The first one is resource attributes, which will include all resource attributes on the target object that are associated to a lookup using the resource object and its lookup. The second one is for security access groups within Clarity. And the third one, you can pick individual resources in Clarity. One thing to note is that users can successfully save an action item without any recipients, because this may be a work in progress. We do not support object roles and system roles like we do in processes. The actions attribute is also a multi-select, and here you'll select all the possible actions for this particular action item. Here we're using the same lookup that we're using for process action items for that object. The actions attribute is required, and once you save the action item, you will not be able to update it any longer. So once again, once the required fields are populated, the next button is enabled, and you'll click Next to proceed to Step 3 of creating your action item. On this screen is where you'll create your decision and closure criteria for your action item. Your decisions list includes all the actions that you defined for this action item in Step 2. So you'll just select one of those. When you're selecting the number of recipients, you have 3 options that you can select here. You can either select any recipients, all recipients, or you can choose number of recipients, in which case you'll get a pop-up box where you can actually type in a number. Now, you won't be able to save an action item unless you have both an action response and recipient criteria populated. So at that time, the Save button will appear. And once you complete your first action item closure criteria, your action and your recipients, then you will see a new button called Add Decision Option, in which case you'll be able to add more criteria for a decision that applies to this action item. And whenever you're done, you just click Save to save your action item. Next, let's talk about how you update action items in the library. You can choose one of 4 options. Option 1 is you can update the attributes in Step 1 and Step 2 directly in the grid. Option 2, if you click on the name of the action item, you'll actually get the pop-up modal to update action items, and it'll go through steps 1 through 3, and you can update attributes on those screens. Now, if you'll remember, the only attributes that you can't update after they're saved are the target, object, and the action attributes. Your third update option is you can just highlight over the action item name and do the right-click option. And if you do that, you'll also get the update action item modal that you see here in this second screenshot. And the last option that you have is you can either do single or bulk editing by check marking one of the action items, and then you can see the edit button right up near the item selected. You can just select that to do single edits or bulk updates. As we update these action items, we're going to need to understand what happens to any in-flight action items and when these changes will actually take effect. So as a business role is triggered, that's the point at which the action items are actually created and sent to the assignees. So whatever criteria is defined in your action item at the time it's generated is what you'll see. What that'll mean is any changes that you make to the name, description, subject, priority, or message will only be captured for in-flight action items if they haven't been sent to any assignees yet. And similarly, the same behavior will happen for action item recipients. So if you add a new recipient and you have in-flight action items, those new recipients will not receive any action items for anything that's in flight. But the next time that an action item is triggered and they're part of the recipient list, that is whenever they will receive the action items. And as you would expect, any closed action items aren't going to reflect any updates that you make. Now, updates to the decision criteria is going to behave a little bit differently. The action and decision criteria for closure is actually evaluated when an action item response is received from an assignee. So any criteria that exists at the time of that response is what we're going to execute. So what that means is if you make any changes to the closure criteria or the actions, that'll be captured for in-flight action items only if your action item is still not closed yet and it's still being evaluated. And naturally, any action items that are closed aren't going to reflect any changes that you make to the action item. Now, if you want to delete your action item, you have a couple of different options you can take. So you can right-click over the action item name, and you can select Delete Row to delete your action item. And your other option is you could check the action item, either single or bulk, and you can delete these by selecting the delete button up near the item selected on the screen. Anytime that the administrator deletes an action item, they're going to receive this delete action item pop-up, which is just going to ask if they're sure that they want to permanently delete these action items and notifying the administrator that any business roles that are associated to this action item are actually going to be deactivated. So they'll be able to either cancel or proceed with the delete in that instance. If there are no in-flight action item instances for the deleted action item, then the system will delete your action item as you requested, and it will deactivate the business role that triggered it. Now, if there are in-flight action item instances for the action item that you're trying to delete, what will happen instead is you'll get a toast message that says one or more action items cannot be deleted. So it's going to actually prevent you from deleting this action item until the administrator closes all in-flight action items first. Next, we're going to take a look at how these action items in the new library are actually triggered. So in the blueprint, you'll either navigate to an existing business role or you'll create a new business role for the action item trigger. And you'll enter the role and description if it's a new role. And you want to make sure that you have a target object populated. Now you want to make sure for the role type that you select Attribute Update. And then after that, you'll select a target attribute of which you'll base your condition on. And you'll click the Add Condition button to begin building your condition. Now once your condition's defined for whenever you want the action item to trigger, then you'll select Add Actions. So if you look at the lower screenshot, you can see that the action that you want to select is Send Action Items. And then the last step that you'll do here is you'll actually select one or more action items that you want to trigger as part of this role. Now the action items that will be available here are the ones that you created in the new library. You're not going to see any process action items that you might have created in Classic, because process action items can't be triggered by business roles. And once you're done either creating or updating your business role, you'll either click Save or Create, and then you'll publish your blueprint and make sure that your business role is enabled. Users can view these action items in the new library in the modern UX in a couple of different places. For supported master objects, like project and other investments, you can navigate to the Action Items module, and you'll actually be able to view the action items that are under that master object. You could also navigate to a page canvas and look at the action items table widget, and here is where assignees will be able to see the action items that they need to respond to, and they'll actually be able to respond to them directly here. And what we're going to cover next after this topic is they'll also be able to respond to them in a new place in My Workspace, and assignees there will be able to view and actually respond directly to their action items. In mobile, assignees can also view and respond directly to their action items. And lastly, if they have the responding to emails configured for action items, assignees will be able to respond to their action items directly in email. When you're viewing these action items, you might notice that the triggered by is populated. And what that's going to represent here is the user who is in Clarity, who updated a value that actually triggered the business role, is going to be who the name of that person is who's going to be the triggered by for these new action items. I briefly alluded to My Workspace on my previous slide, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more detail here. So as you can see, under My Workspace, we added a new tab called Action Items. And here in this work area, assignees will be able to see all the action items that they're an assignee on, regardless of if they were process action items or action items for the new library. They're going to see all of them, but they will not see any manual action items that were created in Classic. In My Workspace, the action items that will appear here are for the supported master objects of investments, projects, ideas, CITs, and you'll also see action items for custom master objects. You'll also see process action items for supported sub-objects. The action items on this page are grouped by three main categories: open, pending, and closed, and it has a count for each one of those groupings. And the data on the page is sorted by the most recent initiated action item first. And this is consistent with how we've been displaying action items in other areas throughout the product. Here in My Workspace, the assignee will have action buttons that they can actually click on and take action directly. So one of the things that I want to note is that there are no new security rights that are needed to see this page. They just need to have access to my workspace. And the last point that I want to make is there is a link on this page, an object instance link, and it's only available for an investment in CMO master objects, but it's not available for sub-objects. So by default in my workspace, the view history section is collapsed. And I wanted to show you a couple of screenshots of what it looks like whenever it's expanded. And I have two examples here. The top screenshot is an example of an action item from the new library, and the bottom one is an example of an action item that was generated by a process. You can see that they're pretty identical, except for the triggered by field. For blueprints, business roles, it's triggered by the person who updated clarity that triggered the business role. In this case, it's Paul Martin. And for the process action item, we're actually showing the process name. In the history section, you'll be able to see the stage of the action item and the life cycle history of what occurred for the action item. And we're using the same format in the action items module. So this should look pretty familiar. And the date and the time format that we're using to display can actually be set in user settings under general. And it's displayed in the user's time zone, not the server's time zone. Next, we're going to take a look at the action items module that will be available for custom master objects. Last release, this module was available for investments, and we wanted to extend it for custom master objects. Your open action items are expanded by default in summary form, and the closed items is collapsed. Now users are going to see action items in this module that were created in Classic through processes, and they're also going to see action items from the new library here. And you don't have to be an assignee for an action item to see them here. Essentially, whatever action items exist under the custom master object will appear on the screen. Under their grouping of open and closed, they're sorted by the most recent initiated action item first. And users don't need to have any special security to see this page. Whoever has access rights to view the custom master object will be able to see this action items module. So now we're going to take a look at the action items module in expanded form. Notice that there are not any action buttons for any assignees to take action on. This is primarily designed as a way to view the life cycle of each action item for the custom master object. Once you expand your action item, you'll note that it can be in one of three stages: initiated, decisions, or closed. And we're going to show you all the details historically of what transpired during each one of those relevant stages. The date and time format is actually set in user settings under general, and the data here will display in the user's time zone and not the server's time zone. One important thing to note is if you have action items for any sub-objects of this custom master object, they are not going to be shown in the module. In our next topic, we're going to look at some enhancements we made to the responding in action items via email capability. We're looking at the configuration screen that administrators would configure to actually consume this capability. So note the behavior for the active flag. If it's checked, the assignee is actually going to receive an email to respond, and it'll have the action buttons for this new capability that we delivered last release. However, if it's unchecked, the assignees will not receive an action item, but instead they will receive a notification in the old format where actions cannot be taken. We also added a new attribute called mail polling interval. And this attribute will be used to save the time element that the customer's email account is pulled to look for responses from assignees. Last release, we set this internally as a default for every 5 minutes. So we wanted to provide some flexibility for administrators to actually set this to something different. And we are suggesting that the appropriate values for this interval polling would be somewhere between 1 and 60 minutes. If administrators set a value over 60 minutes, they're going to get an error message. Now this attribute is not required, and if customers do not populate it, by default it's going to continue with the past behavior and it'll just continue to poll every 5 minutes. We also made a couple of changes in the email template. As you will recall, this is what the email response looks like when the assignee actually clicks a button. In this case, the assignee clicked Done. So we wanted to add a new line to this email template that says basically, do not delete or change any text below this line or the response from the assignee will not be processed successfully. And you can see that note here highlighted in red. Now to the text below that assignee should not be changing is the encoded text. And what we did was inside of that we added the user's email address. And the last change that we did to this capability is we improved the debugging and log entries. The last topic that I'd like to cover in this training session is the purging of action items. Prior to this release, you could not directly delete non-personal action items. And whenever you ran the delete process instance job to delete process instances, any action items that are associated to those instances would also get deleted. So the history would get lost. Now we wanted to make some changes in the current release to give administrators more control over when these action items are getting deleted. So the first thing we did was we updated the existing delete process instance job so that it no longer deletes any associated action items to the process that's being deleted. So although you'll have some process action items that are no longer associated to the process since it may have been deleted, you will still retain the object's association to the action item. We also added a new job in Classic called Purge Action Items. This job will allow users to go in and actually delete specific action items based on filters. The first filter is called Type, and it will allow users to actually delete action items that are of a specific type. Note that Blueprint is how we're referring to the action items that are created in the new library this release. And there's also other types like process action items, project, risk, issues, and personal action items. Another filter for the job is you could look at status for open or closed. And the last filter that we're providing here for this job is really the date range of the created date for your action item, where you can select to delete action items within the date range. And the last note that I want to make is pretty important. And if you have action items, they're not going to be deleted if they're associated to any process instances that are not completed or canceled. Next, we're going to move into the demonstration portion of this training session. The first thing that I'm going to demonstrate is how to create, update, and delete action items in the new library and show you how to trigger them in the blueprint. Next, under My Workspace, we're going to take a look and I'm going to demonstrate the New Action Items tab. And then, under the Custom Master Objects, we're going to look at the Action Items module. And after that, we're going to take a look at the enhancements for responding to action items directly via email. And lastly, we're going to take a look and run the Purge Action Items job. My first demonstration will be how to create action items in the new action item library in Modern. I'm logged in as administrator, and you'll navigate to administration and you'll see the new tile called action items. To see the tile, you'll need to have a new security right called administration action items navigate. So we'll click on the tile and you can see that we are landed in the action items grid. This grid has the regular grid functionality like creating filters and exporting to CSV and other things. You can also have the details flyout will be available here. You can go in and configure some columns to show up in the grid. But you will not have the plus quick create here. We've disabled it, and instead you'll have a new action item button that you'll use to create action item. You cannot create these action items in Classic. It has to be done here in Modern. Remember that any action items that are created here are not dependent on process. So let's go and create our first action item. Click New, and you can see all the required attributes are designated with an asterisk. So we'll call this one Capital Expenditure Approval. We'll set the target object to Project. Now you're able to update this target object until you click Save, and we'll go into the update situation a little bit later. I'm just going to cut and paste this here. Now in the subject, which is required, there's a section here called Add Attribute. This is similar to how you create variables and process action items in Classic. So you'll have be able to select project attributes. So let's update this subject. And we will select the ID for the project to show up as a variable, and you can see what the format is. And you can go in and delete these here just by clicking delete. You can also add the same variable more than once. You can do the same thing in message and add attributes, so we will do that now. This time we'll select the project name. And we have a priority. Now once you've entered all the required attributes, the next button is enabled and you can actually select next. So let's continue to the next screen. Here's where you define and enter the recipients for the action item and the actions that are available for this particular action item. And these are all multi-selects. So here you can see all of the project attributes that use resource as a lookup. And the second one is the security groups that you can select to send the action item to. We're just going to pick a couple of resources here. And for actions, we'll just click Approved and Rejected. The action values are based on the same lookup that we use in process action items for this object, the project. And you can see that you don't have to define recipients because this could be a work in process, this action item creation, but actions are required. So we'll go to our final screen, and this is where we enter the decisions and closure criteria for our action item. While you have an Add Decision option available, you can see it's grayed out now, and it'll become active once we have our previous full decision criteria defined. So we'll define for approved, and we want this to be all recipients, but note that you can have all recipients, number of recipients, and any recipients. If you were to pick a number of recipients, that's whenever you'll have this new box here where you actually type in the number of recipients. But I'm just going to select all recipients. That's our first criteria, and the next one that I want to define is rejected. I also want to close this action if any recipient rejects it. And once I'm finished creating this action item, I just click Save. Next, we'll cover where we can perform updates to our action item. You could go directly in the grid and make changes here. But notice that you don't have any of the decision criteria defined here in the grid. That's complex, so the only place you can really do that and make changes to that is in the action item create or update modal. Could also make changes in the details flyout. Change this back to medium. The next two options that I'm going to show you how to make updates to this action item is probably the preferred approach, because you'll actually be able to make updates to all the attributes, even the complex ones, and that is through the action item update modal. So you can access that in one of two ways. You can either do it through the right-click menu, or you can click directly into your action item. And you can see here you have the update modal. Notice that during update, the target object, you cannot update it, but you can update any other attribute here. I'll change this back to low. The target objects that are supported for these action items are investments and custom master objects, but not any sub-objects. So let's say I want to make another change. We'll add a recipient here. So now I have 3. And notice that actions is grayed out, because once an action item is saved, you're prevented from making any updates to that attribute. Now, the updates that we've made to this action item on page 1 or even to the assignees will be reflected whenever action items get sent to assignees. So these updates that I made will only be reflected on the action items where none were sent yet to any assignees. So let's continue to the next page. If I wanted to delete any of these conditions, I could actually use the trash can here to do that, or make any changes that I want here as well. The decision and closure criteria that's defined on this page is evaluated whenever assignees respond. So if there's any changes done here, that's when they'll be reflected as assignees respond. You also have the option to add more decisions if you wanted to. And when you're done with all your updates, you would just click Save. Now, let's actually go in and trigger our action item. You'll do this under Blueprints via Business Rules. So I'll go into the Major Project Blueprint, which is the one that e-commerce is using, into Edit Mode, under Rules, and I'm going to create a new business rule here. We'll call it the same thing. Target object, we want to remain the project. Now what's important here under the role type is you have to select attribute update. That's the only time that you can trigger these action items. In fact, they'll be triggered whenever users go in and they update the field in Clarity that this condition's based on to trigger the action item. But if they're going in and they are creating new projects or copying projects, this business rule will not trigger. It will trigger only on project updating. So let's select our target attribute, which was cost type. And how we'll define that is we need to add a condition, and we'll say it is equal to capital. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to define the actual trigger for this business rule, which will be our action item. So under data actions, because remember this is an update data action, you'll click on add actions, select send action item, and then you'll see a list of all of the action items that were created in the new action item library in Modern. And this is the one that we just created, so we're going to select it. And if we wanted to add other conditions that do different things in this rule, you could. But whenever you're done, you click Create. And you want to make sure that your new business rule is enabled, and then you would click Publish. So as a user, let's go into the project and actually trigger this business rule. So I want to go under e-commerce portal project, which is using my major project blueprint that I just changed, and you can see that the cost type right now is defined as operating. So as soon as I change this to capital, it should trigger this business rule, which will create the action item. And let's verify that. The first place we'll look is in e-commerce in the action items module. We should see our action item. And here it is, capital approval. You can see it's a low priority, which we changed it to last. It was triggered by Ian, which is myself, and it has 3 recipients, and there are no decisions taken on it yet, which is accurately reflected. Now, because Ian's not one of the recipients, the only way he's going to see his action item in my workspace or on the page canvas action item widget is if we're logged in as one of the recipients. So let's log out as Ian, and we'll log back in as Paul Martin, who's one of the recipients. So first we'll go into my workspace. And let's navigate to the open. And you can see our action item that we created here against e-commerce project that was triggered by Ian, and these are the 3 recipients. And if Paul wanted to, because he's one of the recipients, he could actually take action here. If you navigate into Pages, here I have the Action Items card widget. Configure to display here. And if you go here, you can see that this is the action item here that we just created. And we have our 2 action criteria: approved and rejected. So let's go in and approve this action item as Paul Martin. Okay, we get a message that the approver was changed from open to pending, so now it's on the pending tab. You can see that his action was approved. Now Paul could also take action in the responding to action items via email capability if it's configured by administrator, or he could do that in mobile, which we saw also released. Now we're going to explore my Workspace, the New Action Items tab, next, but first I want to go through some delete scenarios of this action item first. So we have an in-flight action item here, and as administrator I want to go in and try and delete it. So if I go to navigate to administration, under action items, you can see the action item that I created here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can delete action items. You can either do the single or bulk edit or delete here is available. You could also do the right click menu and delete row, and let's do that. So the first thing that you'll get is a confirmation pop-up window asking if you're sure that you want to delete these action items, because any action items definitions that have action items that are currently connected to active business rules will also be deactivated. We're deactivating those business rules. So if I want to proceed with that, I would say yes, delete. So notice that I got a toast message here that says one or more action items cannot be deleted. So what we're doing here is we're preventing you from deleting action items whenever there are currently in flight action items that exist. You have to first close all your action item instances before you can delete your action item definitions. So next we'll log in as Cheryl Amos, which was also an assignee for this particular action item. We'll go into the page canvas, my work, and this time we're actually going to reject this action item. Because if you recall, the part of the closure criteria is we just needed one person to reject it or everyone had to approve it. So as soon as I do this, it should go to closed. It says the status changed. So let's log back out and in as administrator. So if we navigate to e-commerce project, we'll look at the action items module. Under closed, you can see that our action item was closed. So remember that Ian triggered it. There were 3 recipients. Paul Martin approved it, and Cheryl Amos rejected it, which caused it to close. So now we don't have any more in-flight action items instances against this action item. So I'm administrator, so I'm going to go log in and navigate to action items. And now I should be able to delete this action item since I don't have any in-flight instances. So let's do that. So I get my confirmation email because it's asking me if I want to proceed, and it's also telling me that any business rules connected to this action item will be deactivated. So let's go ahead and delete that. You'll see that I was allowed to delete that. So if we go back here and we look at the blueprint again, we should see that our blueprint business rule that triggered this action item should now be deactivated. And this was the one here, capital expenditure approval, and you can see that it is not enabled. Next, we'll take a look at action items in my workspace. I'm currently logged in as Paul Martin. So we'll navigate to my workspace. Now Paul has access to my workspace and he can view any tab within this area. As you can see here, he has a number of action items, and the ones that appear in my workspace are the ones where he is an assignee, and they're in various states of open, pending, and closed. Let's navigate down and take a closer look at one of the action items in his project for e-commerce. Notice that the view history is collapsed by default. So for each action item in this workspace, we're showing the subject, the priority, and we also provide a link for master objects back to the master object. In this case, we're looking at projects. So we've navigated to the e-commerce portal project, and we have a breadcrumb where we can also navigate back to our action item. So for our action item, we also have the message body and we have the action buttons where he can actually take action on his action items in this workspace. So if we expand the view history, you'll be able to see the life cycle so far for this particular action item. You can see when it was initiated. It was actually triggered by Paul by an update that he made in Clarity Data for this project, and it was sent to 2 other recipients besides himself, and nobody has taken action on it just yet. Now I know that this is an action item for in the new action item library because it was actually triggered by Paul Martin, not by a process. Process action items will show up here too. For example, we have another one for e-commerce portal, and it says the actual project process that triggered it. So let's take a look at an action item in pending mode. For Paul, you can see that he has taken an action already approved, and you can tell that because if you go into the decisions view history section, you can see that Paul Martin approved it about a month ago. And next, if we take a look at one of his closed action items, you can see that it has similar data, only it'll include the closed stage down here and some details about when it was closed. So let's navigate back to the open action item that we were looking at on e-commerce for Paul, and we'll actually take action on it. We have 5, 1, and 6 here. So if we click done, you'll see that the action item changed from open to done, and this particular action item only needed 1 response from an assignee, so it actually moved from open to the close tab. So if we go under the close tab, we can actually see the action item that he closed here. And this completes my demonstration of the new Action Items tab in my workspace. Next, we're going to take a look at the Action Items module on Custom Master Objects. As you can see here, I have a custom master object set up called BSR Staging Data. We'll go into an instance of it. Now, Administrator has configured the Action Items tab to show up for this custom master object. As you can see by default, there are 2 groupings of action items. One is open and the second is closed. And by default, the open is expanded in summary form and closed is showing collapsed. Now, the action items that display here may be process action items or any new action items from the new action items library. And they're going to include all the action items that are against this custom master object, regardless of who the assignee is. Users who have access to this tab will be able to see any action item and have rights to view the history and detail of them. They are displayed in the order of most recently initiated first, under their open and closed grouping. And the summary mode displays the stage that the action item is currently in, as well as some high-level information. So if we expand, you can see the kind of detail and history that is provided for the life cycle of this action item. You can see when it was initiated, the date and the time. You can see that it was triggered by Paul Martin. It was sent to 2 recipients, and no decisions have been taken on it yet. One thing that's important to note is in the Action Items module for investments, you're not able to take any action on action items here. You'll have to go to My Workspace or one of the other work areas to actually respond to action items. Next, let's expand the closed section and take a look at what is available for closed action items. You can see that this particular action item has all the stages that it's gone through because it's closed now: initiated, decisions, and closed. And it gives the date of when it was initiated, just like it does on the open section. And there was one decision that was taken. It was rejected by Cheryl Amos 7 days ago, and it was closed on that same day. If you have any action items for sub-object data, it's not going to display in the module. Next, we will take a look at the enhancements that we made to the responding to action items via email capability. First, we'll review the configuration changes. I'm logged in as administrator, so I want to navigate to Classic, to the Mail Service Beta configuration screen. The first change that we made is in regard to the behavior for this active flag. When it's active, this capability will be active, and your users, once it's set up properly, will receive emails to respond to their action items. When it's unchecked, this capability will not be active, and users will receive notifications from the notification templates that we define in Classic that they do have action items, but of course, since they're notifications, they're not going to be able to take action on them. And the last configuration change we made is we added a new attribute here called Mail Polling Interval, and currently I have it set at 2 in this environment. That attribute designates in minutes the frequency that the job will pull for responses from assignees on their action items. Last release, this frequency was not configurable, and everybody's service would pull every 5 minutes. And now that it's configurable, you'll want to enter an integer between 1 and 60 minutes. Anything over 60 minutes, it'll throw an error and won't let you save it. We'll also look at a couple of changes that were done on the assignee side. As you can see here, I'm showing an example of an email that an assignee would receive to respond to a particular action item. So when they click Done, this is the response that would be sent back to the service. Now, we made 2 changes here on this response email. The first one is we added this do not delete or make any changes below this line here. We added that message because we don't want users to delete anything or remove anything below here, because otherwise their action item will not be processed correctly. And the other thing that we did here is in the encoded text here, we added the user's email address. In our last demonstration today, we're going to take a look at how action items can be deleted. I'm currently in Classic, logged in as Ian. And the first thing that I want to look at is changes that we made to an existing job. So this job, delete process instances. We made an update to this job where it no longer deletes action items. Prior to this change, if you had action items that were associated to process instances which you were deleting, it would also delete those action items. And then you would lose history. So we wanted to change that and give the user more control over how these action items can get deleted. We created a new job called Purge Action Items. Let's take a look at that. Now you can schedule and run this job just like any other job in Classic, and it has some parameters that will enable you to have more control over which action items get deleted. Your first parameter is the type of action item. So the options here in our list are Blueprint, which are the new action items in the new action items library. And you can delete process action items, personal action items, and you can also delete action items for issues, projects, or risks. So you can select one or more of these. You also have a parameter defined for status where you can choose open, closed, or both. And the last parameter that's available is the date range. And here you would specify the dates for your action item creation date. Relative dates are available as well. Each one of these parameters is required as designated here by the asterisk next to them. And once you complete your criteria for your job, you would just click Submit, and it'll run and delete all of your action items that you've specified. And this concludes this session of supportability on the action item enhancements. Thank you.